to the Ohio State Treasurer Candidates Debate in Findlay, Ohio, sponsored jointly by the American Association of University Women Ohio, Findlay Branch, the Courier, WFIN, and UFTV. I am Jillian from Town of Draper, immediate past president of AAUW and the coordinator for this evening's debate. We extend a warm welcome to the candidates, their staffs, and members of the media who are attending tonight. But this event, above all, is for you, the members of the community, our audience, the voters. In just over a week, you, the voters of Ohio, will decide which one of these two candidates will become Ohio's next state treasurer. Consistent with AAUW's commitment to, quote, hear and learn inspirational words from statewide leaders dedicated to empowering women with information and the resources necessary to succeed. Therefore, with this purpose in mind, we offer this opportunity to the greater Hancock County community. And we want to especially thank our partners, the Courier, WFIN Radio, and UFTV for their role in helping to make this evening a success. To be truly meaningful, a debate for this evening must give the candidates an opportunity to articulate their views on the issues as presented. The audience, in turn, must be given the opportunity to pose questions to further elicit candidate response. Ground rules incorporating common sense, courtesy, and justice are essential. The ground rules for tonight's debate are as follows. The debate will begin with each candidate having 2 minutes to make a short opening statement. Then the audience will ask its questions, keeping them brief and limiting each question to one topic. The audience member may indicate if the question is to be answered either by both candidates or by one specific candidate. Each candidate may take no more than 2 minutes to respond to a question. After the candidate completes his answer, the other candidate will receive 1 minute in rebuttal. Although this evening is not a press conference, members of the media, a part of tonight's audience, may be addressed questions to the candidates. When all who wish to do so have asked their questions, the question and answer period will close. We will attempt to exercise some control over the debate process. While some latitude is assumed, questioners are asked to refrain from questions of an overly personal or non-topic relevant issue. Finally, each candidate will receive 2 minutes to make his closing remarks, and the debate will conclude. May this be an informative evening for all. Special thank you to Doug Jenkins of WFIN, who will be guiding the debate. May tonight be a special evening for candidates and audience alike.
We'll begin here in just about 3 minutes. Also, someone told me right before we started that someone had their lights on, and I forget the description of the car. A red Buick with their lights on in the parking lot. So if that is you, you may want to take care of that now. And again, we'll begin. Good evening from the University of Findlay, and welcome to the Ohio Treasurers Forum, sponsored by the American Association of University Women Findlay Chapter, the Courier, UFTV, and WFIN. I'm WFIN News Director Doug Jenkins, and I'll serve as co-moderator for tonight's event. I'll also be joined by the Courier's Steve Dillon. Now, tonight's forum is an opportunity for you to find out more about the individuals running for Ohio Treasurer. Here's a review of the format for those of you listening at home or watching at home. The format consists of a 3-minute opening statement by each candidate, as well as a 3-minute closing statement. In between these statements, we'll ask questions of the candidates, and they'll have 2 minutes to respond. If we believe that a follow-up is necessary, the candidate might be asked a follow-up question. And again, these statements will have 2 minutes in response time. If a candidate calls their opponent into question during an answer and we feel a response is necessary, their opponent will also have 2 minutes and a rebuttal. Steve and I have selected the questions for tonight's forum, and no candidate is aware of the questions that they'll be asked. We're also accepting questions from the audience and from those of you in attendance tonight. Now, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, the forms are on the back where the campaign literature is. You can fill out the forms there. When we get close to about a break at the half-hour mark, you'll be able to pass those towards the middle. And then during the break, Steve and I will sort through them to make sure that we don't have duplicate questions and that they're on topic. So we'll have those coming up in the second half of our forum. We'd like to thank our candidates for participating tonight. Democrat Rob Richardson and Republican Robert Sprague. Applaud, if you will, now. And now that we have the applause out of the way, we'll ask that you hold your applause again until the end of tonight's forum so that we can ask the maximum amount of questions. Before tonight's forum, we flipped a coin to determine who would give the first opening statement. Rob Richardson, you won and elected to go first, if I recall correctly. Or no, I'm sorry, Robert Sprague won, and he'll go first. I didn't put it in the script.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming this evening. I'd like to welcome my opponent, Rob Richardson, also coming to Findlay. Rob and I actually share a few things. First of all, we share a first name, Robert. Secondly, we both have engineering degrees. And third, and perhaps most important, we both come from hometowns that have great ice cream stores. Cincinnati has Graders, and Rob Findlay has Dietz's. So you'll have to swing by Dietz's and kind of judge for yourself as to who's best. That's certainly a contest that we can both enjoy well after November the 6th. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Treasurer's Office. what does the Treasurer's Office do? Well, you invest, you protect, and you issue debt. So you invest almost a $20 billion portfolio. That's a lot of money. It's a complex portfolio. You issue almost $1 billion worth of debt every year. You're the banker for the state, and you interface with the private capital markets. And finally, you also safeguard billions of dollars for the public pension systems to keep those investments safe. How do I think voters should choose the next treasurer for the state of Ohio? Well, I suggest that they might want to think about an approach that they would take if they wanted to hire a personal financial manager. So what sort of things would you consider? I think that you might want to hire someone with, number one, experience and ability. Make sure that person has a track record. Number two, somebody that you trust to keep your money safe so that you know it's going to be there when you retire. Number three, somebody that could bring forward good ideas that meet your objectives for your financial objectives. And number four, finally, somebody that would make decisions based upon what's best for you, not their own agenda. Those are some of the things that you might want to consider as you're hearing our discussion tonight. Tonight, you may or may not like Mr. Richardson's ideas or my ideas, but I think that you must evaluate them through the lens of whether or not that is the duty of the Treasurer of State. Now, Mr. Richardson and I were interviewed by numerous newspaper editorial boards, together and separately, and each and every one of them walked away with the same conclusion, that my extensive private sector and public sector finance background set me aside and made me uniquely qualified to serve as Treasurer of the state of Ohio. I feel that my experience will allow me to not only fulfill all the statutory duties of the office, but still leave room for me to expand into new territory that will help build a stronger future for the families of the state of Ohio. And remember, your money is safe with Sprague.
Mr. Richardson.
Well, I also want to thank everyone for coming here tonight. It's an honor for me to be here in Findlay. When I look at the fact that I'm on this stage, it was improbable. I've spent a lot of my career focusing on the fact that many people said I wouldn't be in the positions that I am today. Early on in school, I was told that I would never go to college, but here I stand. And so I know what it's like for others to try to limit your opportunities. So I've spent my whole time in public service focused on making sure we can expand access and opportunities for people. I'm proud of my record at the University of Cincinnati. I was fiduciary for a $1 billion budget. We increased cash reserves from about negative 20,000 to over 300 million. We achieved record enrollment 5 years in a row. That record enrollment still continues. I founded the Innovation Center 1819 and the 1819 Innovation Hub. Also had a partnership with Marathon Oil to help first-generation students get into engineering at the University of Cincinnati. In the private sector as an attorney, I've spent my career protecting pension funds, multi-billion-dollar pension funds in cases of fraud. I've also sued pharmaceutical companies to make sure that we recover for patients and what's called third-party payers, which are health and welfare funds. So I've spent my entire career making sure that we hold the powerful accountable and that we expand access and opportunities for folks. And I'm going to do that as the next treasurer. When I look at one thing that the current treasurer talks about, he talks about the checkbook, and that's been his central focus. When I look at that, I want to flip how that's done, actually, and make sure taxpayers understand how the money's being spent, not only how the public's spending it from local governments, but how the private sector is spending public money. So we can make sure we have transparency to prevent things like ECOT. So we can hold pharmaceutical companies accountable, and we must use the power of this office to, of course, be fiscally responsible, but also be socially responsible. The fundamental difference between us is that I'm going to make sure we look out not only for the short-term interests, but the long-term interests of taxpayers and for the state of Ohio. And we have to use this office to expand access and opportunities for folks while also holding the powerful accountable. I've spent my career doing that. I will do that as your next treasurer if I'm given the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, first question. The state treasurer serves as the state's banker, collecting and safeguarding taxes and fees, managing state investments, and issuing debt. Both of you have suggested you'd like to do more than that. Will you explain one or two things you'd like to do that isn't being done now, and explain how you believe that falls under the treasurer's umbrella? Mr. Sprague?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that I'd like to do, and this is authorized through the Ohio Revised Code right now, but I'd like to see us begin to tackle with some innovative solutions things like the heroin epidemic. And I've spent a good deal of time working on the heroin epidemic throughout the state of Ohio. With my financial background, when I got down to Columbus, I thought I'd be the finance guy, work on the budget, maybe go to Ways and Means, work on tax policy. But instead, one Saturday morning, as we're bringing our kids back from piano, I got a call from a constituent down in Kenton, Ohio. And she said, Robert, she said, I have 2 daughters, and they're both addicted to heroin. My older daughter got addicted in which she had a track injury and got prescribed Vicodin and went back without my knowing about it repeatedly and got refills. And she gave the pills then to her little sister, who also became addicted. She said, my daughters have been in and out of rehab 17 different times. 17 different times. And we've mortgaged our home to get them help, to try to pay for their treatment. She said, you have to do something about this. And I said, absolutely, I'll look into it down in Columbus. She said, no. She said, you need to do something about this. And I've worked extensively on the heroin issue, but one of the problems that we've been unable to solve is the fact that our recovery rates are so low. Our average recovery rate in the state of Ohio is only 11% after 1 year for heroin addiction. And I believe we've got to activate the private sector to stand shoulder to shoulder with us to begin to create and innovate in the treatment space. And so the idea with these social impact bonds is we have the private sector issue a $1 million bond, and we run a 2-year pilot program with it. If they're able to get, say, 40% recovery rates instead of 11% recovery rates, then the state commits to buying that bond at the end of the 2-year pilot program. It's an innovative way to involve the private sector and begin to create.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson, same question.
Thank you. Well, look, I actually don't think there's anything innovative about giving away public dollars without any accountability. We've done that a lot in this state. The legislature has done it. It's how we got ECOT that nearly lost almost $200 million. So I don't think that's the right way to go. You start with accountability. So I would actually use the power of this office, as I talked about, using the checkbook to look at how drug companies are currently making a lot of money off of the state and making sure that people understand how that money is being spent. That is justifiable and needed to be done because you also have to look out for the long-term interests of the taxpayers. I would also use the power, I've talked about this, looking at divestment in the right areas, working with the pension funds. You have the power of appointment for the 5 pension funds. You have the custodial power as the banker of the state. And I believe you have a responsibility, if you actually want to lead this office, to make sure we are making investments that aren't robbing taxpayers of dollars that I don't think we need to be spending. We spend about $1.8 billion a year incarcerating people. A lot of those people need treatment. And, you know, I just find it hypocritical that my opponent would talk about solving the opioid crisis when he's voted against Medicaid expansion, which is the central funding issue for actually tackling the opioid crisis, when he actually accepts money from pharmaceutical companies, which I will never do, which I think is actually fueling a lot of the opioid crisis. And he also has an endorsement from a sheriff who doesn't even believe that people should receive Narcan, really putting them in a situation where they could die. We have very different points of view here, and I do think your record does matter in terms of if you say you want to lead, what you've actually done in your time in office matters to this issue as well.
Okay, thank you.
I believe with that, we would allow for a rebuttal from candidate Sprague.
Well, I'd just say that, first of all, you know, the social impact bond concept. So is this a 2-minute rebuttal? Is that what we're doing?
Yes,
All
I'm
right,
sorry,
very
2 minutes.
Social impact bond concept, you're not going to pay out on a social impact bond unless the results are achieved. That's what makes it so unique. That's what makes it innovative. And so the private sector has to produce the results, or the state doesn't pay. And what happens is, if you produce better results, then there's a couple things. First of all, we're going to save people's lives. That's first and foremost. We'll get more people into long-term sobriety, long-term recovery, and we will save their lives. That's the first objective. But the second and ancillary objective is that as we do that and we come up with treatment that works better than what we're doing right now, what will happen to the almost $1 billion that we spend on Medicaid right now for treatment? Well, they're going to innovate too, and they're going to figure out, oh, wait a second, we have a solution over here that works, and works much better than what we're currently doing. And so over time, the treatment system will begin to transform to get these higher recovery rates. It's going to save us not only lives in the state of Ohio, over time it will save us money. It will save us money in the money that we pay for treatment. It will save us money on children and protective services. It will save us money on the criminal justice system. And in this way, over time, we'll begin to improve the treatment system in the state of Ohio. I'm proud of my record in the legislature on this particular issue. My opponent brought up Narcan. I was the one, my bill, that funded the ability for anyone to walk in off the street into a pharmacy with a standing order and be able to get a Narcan kit to help keep them alive if they overdose. So I've done a lot of work on this issue, and don't be misled by some of the things that have been said.
Okay, and yes, 2 minutes for Mr. Richardson as well on this.
Yeah, he didn't rebut anything I said. He did vote against Medicaid expansion. He has accepted an endorsement and refuses to reject that endorsement from someone who is denying Narcan, who is ordering all of his officers to deny Narcan to people that actually need it. That's a fact. He does accept money from drug companies. Drug companies are largely profited from the opioid crisis, and you cannot solve this problem if you don't begin with accountability. I believe that's very important. Those are all facts, none of which he just disputed. He's welcome to reject the endorsement today, but he hasn't done it so far. We actually need to make sure we have, Medicaid needs to stay in place. We need to have it. I will work with the Attorney General, the Governor, and anyone we can to make sure we are holding pharmaceutical companies accountable, making sure that the taxpayers understand how their dollars are being wasted, and they are. I believe we can do this, and we must do this to look out for the future interests of taxpayers. So I stand by my statements, and he did nothing to refute what I said.
All right, we'll move on to our next question. Ohio's current treasurer, Josh Mandel, established the website ohiocheckbook.com, which can help public track government finances. First, are you a supporter of the effort? And then what, if any, changes would you make to improve the checkbook? We'll start with you, Mr. Richardson. You alluded to this in your opening statements.
I did. So, yes, I think transparency is fine, and all local governments should be transparent. But what we need is to take that concept a little bit further to make sure that the dollars that are being extended by the public sector to the private sector are more adequately available. So when you look at Jobs Ohio, that should be more transparent. When you look at how we spend money, like ECOT was a preventable issue, and my opponent still stands by the fact he's never said that money should be returned. He's never called for that. In fact, when everyone else said that the school should shut down, he said it should stay open. Even after the Supreme Court, which is all Republican, by the way, said that they stole the money. You can't talk about being a person that's going to help lead the state if you're not willing to, if you didn't show any leadership and accountability when you've been in the state legislature for 8 years. I've always held the powerful accountable. I will hold my party accountable because this office requires you to be fiscally responsible while also holding those who are abusing taxpayer dollars accountable.
Mr. Sprague.
Well, let me tell you about an experience that I had as a young person. You know, I left Findlay and went down to Duke University, and the partner from Ernst & Young came on campus from Atlanta and offered me a job in the job interview. And I told him, I said, look, I don't know anything about management consulting. He said, Robert, he said, look, you'll be fine. I'm going to teach you about business. So I said, fine, I'll go to Atlanta. And my second project that I was on, I ended up going to Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And the problem was that this pipeline was having trouble accounting for all their gains and losses on the pipeline. And I went to the vice president and sat in the meeting and asked them how they wanted to help solve this problem. And they said, well, let's do a benchmarking study. We want to see what our competitors are doing out in the field so that we can figure out how we can do our business better. So let's benchmark Explorer Pipeline, let's benchmark Colonial Pipeline. Well, and they actually wanted to benchmark Marathon Pipeline as one of the best in the industry. So here I was, a kid that wanted to get out of Findlay, Ohio. I'm flying back to Findlay, Ohio to introduce a lot of the folks here at Marathon. And one of the things that taught me was that when you want to solve financial problems, some of the things you have to do is look outside your organization. And so how this pertains to the open checkbook is we've been able to assemble a massive amount of financial data in this open checkbook program that's transparent to everybody in this room. All you have to do is go online and look it up. You can look up any expense from the state. But what you can't do right now is make sense of it. So I'd love to add some benchmarking tools, some analytical tools on top of that financial data so that you as the taxpayer can see, is your government being efficient? How do we compare to other states? And are there areas where we might be able to improve?
Okay. Jobs Ohio, the state's economic development program, appears to be doing a good job for the state, but relatively little is known about its inner workings. Is there anything in the Treasurer's office that can be done to help make the operations and performance of Jobs Ohio more transparent? We'll go back to you, Mr. Sprague.
Sure. Well, I think, that first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the inception of Jobs Ohio and why it was needed. We had a local company here called Cooper Tire and Rubber Company. And in 2008, Cooper came to the city of Findlay and said, look, we're going to have to shut down one of our 4 plants in the United States. Oh, by the way, it costs us $5 more to produce a tire in Findlay, Ohio than anywhere else on our worldwide footprint. And we had 30 days to convince Cooper to keep the plant open. So we had to pull together a string of financial incentives and other things to be able to keep Cooper Tire and Rubber Company here. And after they decided to keep the plant open, we went back to the management. We said, what's the problem? Why would you ever think about leaving Ohio or shutting down this plant? And they said, there's 3 things. First of all, your tax rates are uncompetitive compared with the rest of the world and other states. They said, second of all, your regulatory environment is onerous and overly complicated. And finally, they said your economic development organization is slow and didn't do anything to try to help keep us here. And so one of the first things I did when I came down to the legislature was vote to create Jobs Ohio. We did regulatory reform, we did tax reform, we balanced the budgets, but one of the main things we did was to create Jobs Ohio. And it's funded with the liquor money, liquor profits that go then into economic development. As it pertains to being transparent, obviously you can't have transparency with businesses that are currently being recruited to Ohio, because then that would endanger the fact that you might be able to get Amazon or some other large employer. So if we're going to be transparent with Jobs Ohio, I'd like for us to see us do an audit at the end of the year, just like any other financial organization or company, and make sure that that audit is available to the taxpayers of the state of Ohio.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Richardson?
So as a beginning matter, I believe in responsible investment, and I'll describe what I mean by that. I do believe in public-private partnerships, but it should be done in a way that makes sure that we hire more local Ohioans, that they get the training that they need, and is actually paid with good jobs and good growth. How this is currently done, it's done with none of that in mind. It's just, can we bring in any company at the lowest cost? And that's all that matters. It doesn't even matter how many Ohioans we hire. It doesn't matter what their wages are. I believe we should start with that. And I also think, looking from this office, and so I would use the checkbook in the way I talked about to make sure that we put that data in a way that was easily accessible to taxpayers. Beyond that, though, I think we have to look towards a longer view. Trying to just do everything because one company says they're going to leave and we have to just pull our packages together, figure out how we adjust for that. It would be better to do more to keep talent here, like actually investing in low-interest student loans to make sure we have more students that can afford to go to college here, looking for ways to refinance their loans for the talent that wants to stay here and partnering with the private sector to do that. I'd like to do that through this office, look for ways to not do everything so short-term, but actually have a long-term approach to doing this and be a real problem solver instead of just doing the same things we've always done. It's the reason why we're number 47th when it comes to affordability and access to higher education. It's the reason why we trail the states in so many other things. It's not for the reasons that my opponent stated. It's because we haven't had leadership that's looked for the long term.
Thank you.
All right, we are nearing the midway point of tonight's forum. If you do have questions for the candidates written down, if you'll pass those towards the center aisle at this point, we'll collect those here momentarily. Moving on with our line of questioning, it looks like we have time for at least one more here before we go to our break. We'll start with Mr. Richardson here. You both have spelled out how you would like to impact social issues through the Treasurer's office. And I think that a lot of people who look at this race see it more as a fiduciary office. If you can directly spell out how you impact those social issues through the treasurer's office, I think people would like to hear how that's a one-to-one correlation.
Yeah, so you can be a fiduciary and a leader. I did that at the University of Cincinnati. I did all the things we talked about, and we still invested in things like the Marathon Scholars Academy with the College of Engineering. We still invested in the UC Scholars Academy, which helped area high school students. So as a premise, you can be a fiduciary, you should be a fiduciary, but you also can have vision and lead. So you have the ability to invest. And you can be creative about how you do that through the Ohio Enterprise Bond Fund, for example. You can come up with creative public-private partnerships. I'd like to see us invest in high-speed broadband. I've been very clear about that. I think that's an opportunity for our businesses to be more competitive. And I believe we should invest in low-interest student loans. And there are ways we can partner with the private sector, partner with cities in that, and making sure that we back up those loans at a lower interest rate. We can also, one of the other ideas I talked about was looking at criminal justice reform, and there are two approaches to that. One is to do a fiscal impact analysis and compare our criminal justice system to other states and see where there are opportunities for savings while still keeping people safe, and also working with the pension funds. To what I believe we should do is really divest from for-profit prisons. Those are ways we can tackle criminal justice reform, looking at making college more affordable, and doing economic development.
Mr. Sprague?
Sure. Well, I guess I want to recount that, first of all, you can show leadership, but in the executive office, it has to be within the treasurer's duties and the purview of the treasurer. So one of the things I'd like to do is help people with developmental disabilities. I want to tell you about a story I had as the chairman of the Medicaid subcommittee and the finance committee. We took testimony and we were investing about $300 million into the developmental disabilities system for the state of Ohio. And I'll never forget, we were going late into the night. It was about midnight. And we had one gentleman that wanted to come and testify and refused to leave. And when he testified, he got rather tearful about his son who had a developmental disability. And he told the committee, he said, to tell you the truth, not a lot of people lie awake and worry about what you're going to do with tax policy in the state of Ohio. But I lie awake every night and I wonder about what my son is going to have for himself and what you'll do to the developmental disability system in the state of Ohio when I'm gone. And one of the things I'd like to do in the treasurer's office that pertains directly to the treasurer's office is we have these wonderful programs called a stable account. And the stable accounts allow individuals with a developmental disability to live and work out in the community and be part of the community, earn their own money, spend their own money. I'd love to see us not only foster that, but I'd like to see us improve it. One of the things I'm going to do in the treasurer's office, if I'm elected, is to add a retirement benefit onto that stable account. So when Kroger or other companies are contributing a pension contribution or a 401k match to their other employees, individuals with developmental disabilities will be treated equally, and they'll be able to save for their retirement too.
All right, at that point, we're at the midway point. We'll come back to some of these topics after we take our break. We'll take 2 minutes, back with more questions from the audience after this. Thank you for tuning in on UFTV and 1330 WFIN. And welcome back to the University of Findlay. I'm Doug Jenkins with Steve Dillon, and we are live on 1330 WFIN, 95.5 FM, and on UFTV, both on cable and on YouTube, as we are here for the Ohio Treasurers Forum tonight. If you're just joining us, we have had questions submitted to us from the audience, and we will be asking a few of those now as we enter the last half hour of tonight's forum. Again, our candidates tonight, Rob Richardson and Robert Sprague. Steve will have the first question submitted from the audience.
Okay. What will you do to hold drug companies accountable? Mr. Richardson?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I've spent my entire career doing that, and I will use the knowledge of having proudly sued big pharmaceutical companies and won to make sure we hold them accountable. We have investments through the STAR program that we're going to review. I'm also going to work with the Attorney General. I'm going to work with the governor to make sure that the taxpayers know how their dollars are being used. We're going to use the checkbook to not only look at how local governments are spending, but how the money that we spend through Medicaid and Medicare and how that's spent through drug companies, and so everyone has an easily accessible way to find out about drug companies. And I believe using the power of that office will help. You know, when you look at any office, and because my opponent was, I think, kind of inferring that the things I've been talking about don't have to do with the office. First of all, there are three powers with the office. There's a statutory power of any executive office, and nearly everything I talk about, there is power within the statutory, within the law to do it. There's two other powers with any executive office. There's the power of the bully pulpit. When people expect you, when you're in an executive office, you can use the power of, just like the current treasurer did, to talk about local governments. That's technically not exactly what a treasurer does, but he used the power there to make sure that can be highlighted. I can use a taxpayer's right to know, using that concept of the checkbook, to make sure we're highlighting the abuse of taxpayer dollars. And there's a third power. There's a power to convene. You know, as the chief financial officer, chief banker for the state, you can convene multiple parties. You can convene bankers. You can convene many others to solve society's problems, and you should. Just because things haven't been done by past treasurers doesn't mean we shouldn't. I think my opponent's saying because it hasn't been done by others, we shouldn't even try. We shouldn't try to push the barriers. I'm going to do that. I've always done that, and I will proudly continue to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Sprague, same question.
Well, I think, you know, this is a big contrast between the two of us. I don't feel like that's a job for the treasurer's office in any way. I think it's a job for the Attorney General. The Attorney General needs to hold these drug companies accountable, needs to sue them, as Attorney General DeWine has done. And when there's money that comes back from the drug companies, the legislature needs to appropriate that money and spend it on treatment or other systems that are going to help people who have become addicted to those drugs. In the legislature, one of the things I can tell you that I've done to hold drug companies accountable and to solve the heroin epidemic, which was really started as a prescription painkiller epidemic, is we started out with about 800 million doses of prescription painkillers in 2011 in the state of Ohio. That would be about 83 doses for each and every one of you in the state of Ohio. It was absurd, absolutely absurd. We had a prescription painkiller epidemic that was coming through our medical system, entirely through the medical system. And so one of the things we did in the legislature, which was our purview in the legislature, was to put hard stops on, and you know, one of the things that prescribers hate to do is go through prior authorizations. And so we made them go through a prior authorization anytime they made a prescription for over 80 morphine equivalent doses a day. Anytime they made a prescription with a benzo and a narcotic together. Anytime they made a prescription for more than 2 weeks. You know, and so over time, what has happened is we've gone from 800 million doses to 550 million doses, a dramatic decline in the amount of narcotics that are being prescribed in the state of Ohio. But that was entirely on the legislative side. And I just don't think it's a role for the treasurer's office. You have a fiduciary responsibility to execute.
May I respond to that too?
We'll allow for a rebuttal and then redirect.
Right. So, you know, Representative Sprague is, I guess, viewing what he's talking about as a success towards the opioid crisis. Look, 14 people are going to likely die tonight. It hasn't been a success. When you talk about solving a problem, you need to be proximate. I've seen addiction and how it affects families because it's affected mine. Before this epidemic, there was the crack cocaine epidemic, and I remember my mother having to help members, her sister's kids in particular, and they really became my brothers and sisters because they stayed with me. My son, who's actually my adopted son, his mother has addiction issues as well. And so he lives with me. I see him as my own son. But these are issues that really affect families. So when you vote against Medicaid funding, these are people that are being hurt. These are not numbers that are just in the air. You know, budgets are more than a collection of numbers. They are a moral document for what you stand for. People are hurt if we don't have access to Medicaid. People are hurt if you don't have people that are willing to stand up to pharmaceutical companies. Yes, you can stand up to pharmaceutical companies. Yes, you can go meet with legislatures. Yes, you can use the power of the media and of the office to make sure you're highlighting the abuse of taxpayer dollars. And yes, you should. You can do that, and you should do that. You can chew gum and walk. You can lead. You can be fiscally responsible and socially responsible. This is a big difference between us. It's a difference between someone who's going to lead with accountability, someone who is not afraid to take on pharmaceutical companies, someone who's not afraid to take on the powerful, because I don't owe them anything, and I will do that as the next treasurer.
All right, Mr. Sprague, we'll give you 2 minutes on the rebuttal response, and then we're going to move on to our next question.
Well, I'd just like to say to that I can chew gum and walk at the same time, so.
Fair enough. All right, next question for both of you. What do you see as the most critical issue that faces the Ohio Treasurer's Office as it stands now? I believe Mr. Sprague has the first response on this question.
Well, in terms of critical issues for the Treasurer's Office, I think that, first and foremost is protecting that money, the taxpayers' money. And I think that one of the things that I bring to the table is a long history of experience in both private finance and public finance. And one of the things I did in the private sector was I started my own consulting firm, and we implemented accounting systems. That was my job. That's how I made my living. We sold accounting systems for mid-sized companies, and I went out and created their chart of accounts. I loaded all their purchase orders into the system, their invoices, their sales orders, put their inventory into the system, and got the system up and running. Why is that important? Because one of the things that is critical when you're safeguarding taxpayer dollars is the people, processes, and technology that go into those accounting systems. We know that one of the problems, and this is very important, is that you've got to have the right processes in place to safeguard those funds. I think that's something I bring to the table. I bring it in spades, and I'm going to make sure that your tax dollars are safe and accounted for. And by the way, instead of making the state's investment portfolio and prioritizing it in terms of social justice issues, here's what I would do with the investments of the state of Ohio. I'm going to prioritize them on your behalf based upon the return that they get and the risk that's involved in holding them, and I'm going to marry that up with the liquidity requirements of the state of Ohio. That's what the Treasurer's Office should be doing.
Mr. Richardson, on the biggest issue facing the Treasurer's Office.
Yes, thank you. The biggest issue facing the office is cybersecurity, really, from my point of view. If you talk to, I've had many conversations with CEOs, bankers. Their number one concern, my number one concern, is about protecting the money, particularly for cybersecurity. The greatest threat is really to hacking and making sure that retirees' pensions can be protected, because, with a hack, that can go away like that. So making sure that we are on the cutting edge of that is something that we have to do and must do, and it's something that I will lead as the next treasurer of the state of Ohio. So I've had experience at the University of Cincinnati founding the 1819 Innovation Hub. We brought together students, entrepreneurs, researchers, and big companies to solve complicated problems. We're going to do that, and we can have these commissions, and I will lead a task force to do this. I'll have someone that is totally dedicated to cybersecurity and cybersecurity innovation. We will organize hackathons to have these are concepts that we can do in different areas where technology companies and others will come together to solve problems that we can hopefully create new startups through this process and be more innovative in how we approach this, because it's a threat not only to our finances, it's a threat if you talk to some CEOs of energy companies. They worry about that. I talked to a energy company CEO. He said they get about 10,000 hits a day, and that's only going up. This is our biggest threat. This is our biggest opportunity, because I think we have to, first of all, be on the edge of protecting taxpayer dollars, but then let us be a leader in actually cybersecurity innovation, where we can be the lead in creating the new technology companies of the future. You can do innovative things from this office. And I will, as your next treasurer, I will be fiscally responsible, and we can be socially responsible. Because at the end of the day, if you don't look out for the long-term interests of taxpayers, that's going to end up costing us more.
Okay. Instead of investing in low-interest student loans, how can Ohio reduce higher education costs overall to result in fewer loans needed? Mr. Richardson?
Yes, thank you. Great question. You know, the state of Ohio, we don't have a resource problem. We have a priority problem. You know, we can find $1 billion to invest in for-profit schools, but somehow we can't invest in public schools. It's not a priority. It hasn't been a priority for the state for a long time. So when you actually don't make investments from the state level, which hasn't been done, it's why we're like 47 when it comes to affordability and access. It's more and more expensive because the state is actually not supporting public education, which I believe is a right. And not only is it a right, it helps you be more economically competitive. So it's in our economic interest to make sure college is affordable and accessible.
Thank you. Mr. Sprague?
Well, I think that for one thing, you could not raise tuition, as my opponent has done on the board of the University of Cincinnati 6 times. I think that would be a good start. You know, when we provide lower interest loans to students, all we're doing is helping them amass more debt, more obligations that they've got to repay in the future. I was in Akron, and I went to what's called a financial empowerment center. And I was asking one of the coaches there, I said, well, what do you find that's the number one reason for that people come in and have problems with their finances? And to my surprise, and this was, you know, an area of Akron that, you know, I thought there might be a lot of different responses, maybe unemployment, but they said no. They said it's student loan debt. That's the number one reason why people come here. It's a huge problem in our society, and the main problem is that the cost of college is way too high in the state of Ohio. And by the way, what you can do about that, instead of asking for more and more and more money from the General Assembly, is manage your budget. Manage your budget and keep the expenses low for the kids and help reduce their tuition instead of adding more and more student loan debt burden. I mean, we have 5 children. It's a tremendous burden on families and on society to have this high cost of college tuition, to have that student loan debt that kids take out. And I think we need to do something about it. One of the things that I'd like to do through the Treasurer's Office is give kids a little bit of financial literacy while they're still in high school, so that they can have some tools to be able to avoid a crippling amount of student loan debt when they get to college. And also explain to them what the path to a good job is, because you can get certifications while you're still in high school and you can have a great career.
The rules would allow for a rebuttal here on the issue of raising tuition.
Thank you. I appreciate that. First of all, I'm very proud of the record at the University of Cincinnati. We were actually voted the #1 return on public investment for any public institution in the United States, not just Ohio. I'm also proud of my record of expanding access and opportunities. I implemented a program that's still permanently funded called the UC Scholars Academy, helping area high school students be able to get access to the university and making sure that they have scholarships when they reach the university. Also working with Marathon Oil, we help first generation students get into engineering. Now, you know, all the financial empowerment in the world won't do anything if you don't have a state legislator that actually supports higher education. The reason why our costs are so high is because we have a state legislature, like my opponent, who doesn't support higher education. It's not a surprise that it costs more. This is how this works. You know, colleges have to often raise tuition because you have a state legislature that continues to cut and cut and cut. And you know what? The University of Cincinnati has been an engine in growth for the entire city of Cincinnati. It's also been the second largest university here in the state of Ohio, which I believe has been the economic engine for most of the region in Southwest Ohio and a lot of the state. It would be nice to have state legislators that actually supported that. Mr. Sprague does not. And I want to say the cost of education in the last 30 years, this is, Mr. Sprague's been pretty fortunate, and I think he's grown up pretty privileged. Because otherwise he would understand the cost of education has gone up 1,000% almost over the last 30 years. That is directly as a result of the fact that state legislators are not supporting higher education, which they should. Instead, they're doing things like for-profit schools, which my opponent still supports, even though ECOT was caught stealing almost $200 million. Again, this is about the priorities and how we invest things, and we should invest in higher education. Unfortunately, we just haven't.
Mr. Sprague, we'll give you 2 minutes as well, and then we'll move on to our next line of questions.
Well, I think that the main problem with the rising cost of college tuition is because the boards of trustees want to build, huge new buildings. They all want to have a new neurological center or whatever the latest program is, right? And they just charge these kids through the teeth for it. They raise their fees on the books. They raise their tuition. They charge them from room and board. And they make it up and they nickel dime these kids all along the way. And I don't need to explain it to you. You've all been through it. Is that fair? Is that what you want here in Ohio? It's because they don't manage their expense side of their books. That's something I had to do at the city of Findlay. We had to manage our expenses. We had to live within a budget. We just couldn't go out and ask the taxpayers for more and more and more money. But that's what they do to these kids. I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's fair. And I think they need to manage their budget. And quite honestly, if my opponent manages the treasurer's office the same way he managed the costs for the kids at the University of Cincinnati, then you're going to see a lot more expense in the treasurer's office as well.
Okay. You both have opinions about State Issue 1. While not necessarily a part of the treasurer's role, it is something every candidate in Ohio, it seems, has chimed in on. What are your thoughts on Issue 1? Start with you, Mr. Sprague.
Well, State Issue 1 is a constitutional amendment that would allow, basically take all of the misdemeanor offenses right now for drug possession. Take all the felony 4 and felony 5 charges for drug possession and make them all misdemeanors. Unfortunately, the way that the constitutional amendment has been drafted, the effect of it is it allows people to have up to 20 grams of fentanyl and still get away with effectively a minor misdemeanor or the equivalent of a traffic ticket. Now, let me explain to you for just a minute the heroin problem that we have in the state of Ohio. We started out with a prescription prescription painkiller problem in the state of Ohio. And when we shut down the pill mills in southeastern Ohio and we shut down doctor shopping across the state, the drug cartels then brought heroin into our communities to fulfill that demand. But you can't even find heroin now in the state of Ohio. Why? Because it's all fentanyl. Fentanyl is about 50 times more powerful than heroin. Why? Because the drug cartels cost them the same to produce a kilogram of fentanyl as it does to produce a kilogram of heroin, except it's 50 times more powerful, so they get 50 times the profit margin. They're bringing it into our communities, and it's what's killing people in the state of Ohio. The vast majority of the overdoses of people that die in the state of Ohio is from fentanyl. And so any constitutional amendment that will let you carry up to 20 grams of fentanyl, enough to kill 10,000 people in the state of Ohio, is insane. It is a bad idea for the state of Ohio. And the other piece of this is that drug courts right now, which help people get into long-term recovery, would be decimated under Issue 1 because you take away the incentive for people to participate in a drug court.
Okay, same question, Mr. Richardson.
Yes, so, Representative Sprague has been repeating the same lie that Mike DeWine is repeating. That's been already disproven by PolitiFact, by Dispatch. But it's repeated, it still doesn't make it true. Look, traffic laws don't change. If you have 1 gram, 10 grams, 20 grams, 100 grams, you can and should be prosecuted under trafficking laws, and you can be. This is a fear tactic, and I think unfortunately, the legislature for a long time has failed. I would prefer, Mr. Sprague to right now he's in office. He has the ability to go make these changes. What's he been waiting for? He's been there nearly 8 years. The reason why nearly over 700,000 signatures were signed by people is because the state legislature has failed. Meanwhile, mass incarceration is out of control because there are people that are going to jail and not getting the treatment that they need. We spend $1.8 billion a year incarcerating people. If we continue down this path, which seems like Representative Sprague wants to do, we're going to increase for-profit prisons. We're going to increase the prisons we have here, spending an additional $2 billion likely that will have to be issued out of the state treasurer's office, by the way. I think that's a waste of taxpayer dollars. It's why we can't invest in things that are actually going to help people, like treatment, like drug courts. What is going on right now is failing the state of Ohio. We could do so much better. And I wish that Representative Sprague would do his job and lead. I wish he would do that now. We don't have to wait. If he doesn't like the constitutional amendment, why not solve it now? Why not solve it with the last 8 years? There have been plenty of opportunities to do this. So look, the people took it into their own hands, which they have a right to do. They can petition their government when the legislature has failed, and they have certainly failed in this area. 14 people are going to die today because of opioid deaths. Many people won't get the treatment they need, and many people will be locked away, separated from their families, and then denied future opportunities because they never get out of this prison industrial complex. I think it needs to stop, and we need to lead.
All right, we've reached I'm sorry, did you have a follow-up, Steve?
No, that's good. We're good.
All right, then. We've reached the end of our question and answer portion of tonight's forum. We'll get into our closing statements now. Mr. Richardson, you have the floor.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. We know we have 8 days, and we face an important question about how you want this office to go. And I believe that we can use this office to really do innovative things while also making sure we hold the powerful accountable, while expanding access and opportunities for people. We can hold drug companies accountable. Just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean it can't be done. We can invest in low-interest student loans to make sure students do have to pay less so they can afford to go here. We can use this office to refinance current student debt that is out there, and we should. We can both protect retirees and invest in future opportunities for folks. I don't want us to get distracted. Look, this election is not about your race, religion, or region. It's not about rural versus urban. It's not about young versus poor. It's not about black versus white. This is about the past versus the future. This is about the type of leadership we need that has not been present in the state of Ohio for a long time. This is about making sure we invest in people. This is about looking out for not only the short term, but for the long term. I want to do that as your next treasurer. I've done that at the University of Cincinnati. We were the #1 return on public investment for any institution in the United States. We had 5 years of record enrollment, which still continue to this day. We're at 7 or 8 right now. I took cash reserves from negative 20,000 to over 300 million. I am ready to lead right now, and what I ask you is for an opportunity to implement this vision, because the citizens of Ohio deserve better. We can do so much more together, and we can really reject these failed policies of the past. But I can't do that without your support. So today I humbly ask for it. I'm Rob Richardson. I want to be there to fight for you. I want to be there to lead, and I want to make sure we hold the powerful accountable. Thank you so much.
Mr. Sprague.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank my opponent, Mr. Richardson, for being here tonight and our exchange of ideas about the Treasurer's Office. I'd like to thank the University of Findlay, WFIN, the Courier, and the American Association of the University of Women for pulling together this forum that we could talk about the future of the state of Ohio. I think it's clear that Mr. Richardson and myself have very different views of what the Treasurer's Office should be doing and ideas for the Treasurer's Office. Mr. Richardson's ideas for the Treasurer's Office, honestly, I think, often infringe on the legislative prerogatives, and I think that his platform is better suited for a legislator than for the Treasurer. History has shown us that there is no place for personal political agendas to darken the door of the Treasurer's Office because the public's money is at stake. These are our tax dollars. These are our pensions. They are not leverage or political tools. The powers bestowed to the Treasurer should never be exploited at the expense of taxpayers and pensioners to make a political statement in order to advance one's personal agenda or political agenda. I will manage Ohio's tax dollars in a skillful and careful way. I will put safety and return first and foremost. I will bring new ideas to the Treasurer's office, innovative ideas that can help people in the state of Ohio that are within the Treasurer's duties. When I returned to Ohio in 2003, we were on a long, slow decline, both in our community and as a state. Findlay's downtown here was in shambles. Our businesses were weak. We were the Rust Belt. And some of our businesses even threatened to leave. But now, with the new ideas that I helped implement in Ohio and helped implement here locally, both our city is on the rise and our state is on the rise. That's the kind of solid leadership I want to bring to the Treasurer's office. I'm Robert Sprague. I'm running to be your next Treasurer of State. I'm ready to put my finance background, my business experience, and my public policy experience to work for you, the people of the state of Ohio, in the Treasurer's office. When I'm elected Treasurer, it's my personal commitment to each of you and each and every Ohioan that I'll conduct myself in a manner that you can be proud of, and I'll serve with the integrity that you deserve. And remember, you're safe with Sprague. Thanks.
Let's thank both candidates for joining us here in Findlay tonight. And we'd like to thank you all for joining us on UFTV. Thank you to UFTV for televising this forum, WFIN at 1330, WFIN at 95.5 FM for live radio coverage. Of course, the Courier and their work in print in covering this evening's activities. Early voting is underway. Election Day next Tuesday. I'm Doug Jenkins for Steve Dillon, wishing you a good night from the University of Findlay.